Let me ask you something. When's the last time you looked at your energy bill and didn't feel completely ripped off? California energy prices are insane. And with recent weather events, rolling blackouts, and rate hikes, things are only going to get worse. So here's the thing. You probably already know that the best way to cut back on your energy bills is with solar. The problem is, it's a solar jungle out there. You've got different brands, equipment, financing, and prices, and every company out there sounds like a used car salesman, which leaves you feeling stuck like you have to wade through a swamp of hype and fake reviews. In this video, I'm going to cut through all that noise and give you the real deal on what it takes to go solar in Southern California. I'll break down the tech in plain English, show you how to avoid common traps, and help you make sure you're getting the most out of your investment. Let's talk about the first big question. How many solar panels do you actually need? Now, a lot of people make this way more complicated than it needs to be. The most accurate way to go about this is to look at 12 months of energy usage. And if you don't have utility bills, there's also ways to download that information directly from the utility company. Based on those numbers, your installer should be able to tell you how big of a system you need in order to cover your usage. Now, different utilities have different rules for how big you can go, but at minimum, you should be shooting for at least 110% of what you currently consume. Depending on your usage, you may require a much larger system than others. Quite frankly, back in the day, a 6 kilowatt system was considered large, but now most homeowners are installing anywhere between 10 to 15 kilowatts on their rooftops, which would be roughly anywhere between 25 to 35 panels depending on the wattage of the panels themselves. So for most homeowners, that should do the trick. However, if you happen to be with a utility company that is on the current NEM 3.0 standard, we would highly recommend adding a battery. Due to the new compensation rules under Net Metering 3.0, the amount of credit that you receive for excess energy sent back to the grid is really not meaningful enough for a solar-only home to make their money back on that system. By adding a battery, it gives you a way to store the energy that you produced very cheaply during the day and then discharge that later at night and therefore make up for the extra costs for that battery. Over time, we find that most homeowners with solar and storage under 3.0 will make their money back within about 5 to 7 years. However, again, if you are with a utility company that is under the older 2.0 standard, you really don't need to have a battery unless you're really concerned about things like backup and making sure that you have your refrigerator running and that sort of thing during a blackout. As installers, we choose equipment that has a strong track record of both performance as well as support. And for us, that would typically mean the Franklin Whole Home A-Power 2, the Tesla Powerwall 3, or the Enphase IQ battery. So here's a few things you might want to consider. Capacity. Depending on how much energy you're looking to consume over what period of time, you want to choose a battery that has enough juice to last you throughout the night, for example. In addition to that, discharge rate. So some folks only want to back up refrigerators and basic things like internet and microwaves, but some folks want to back up the whole home, which also includes things like AC units or possibly other high-powered appliances. That would also dictate what sort of discharge rate you need. And then lastly, the integration. Are you using microinverters? Are you using a string inverter? That also comes into play depending on the type of battery that you use, because not all batteries can work with those systems. Now that we've talked about how many panels you might need, whether or not you need a battery, let's talk about the location of those panels. One of the biggest questions homeowners ask is, what's the best direction for my solar panels? Now, most folks probably already know that south facing here in Southern California will get you the best results. That'll get you the most exposure throughout the year, therefore the best production. However, not all of us have a perfectly south facing roof. That shouldn't be a problem. East and west facing roofs are also great for production as well. Most cases, north facing production isn't that great and usually isn't even worth installing on, but that can vary as well, and your installer can do a shading analysis and a sunlight report to determine that. Let's cut to the question everyone has in their mind. How much is this system going to cost? Here in California, with constantly rising inflation, you got to be smart about where you spend your money. If you go too cheap, you run the risk of engaging with an installer that not only uses cheap materials, but chances are things will not perform the way they're supposed to, and when it comes time for repairs, there's a high likelihood that installer won't even be around to do those repairs anymore. Therefore, your entire investment just goes right out the window. On the flip side, you can also fall into the trap of paying too much for your system. There are plenty of companies with predatory sales practices, and there are no real standards for pricing when it comes to solar energy systems. It is not uncommon for us to talk to customers who wound up paying $25,000 for what should have been something like a $12,000, $13,000 system. In today's market, the thing to do is to find that sweet spot between quality and value. And this is why we highly recommend shopping around. Don't just go with one installer. Talk to multiple installers, and the one that has the best reputation with the price somewhere in the middle is really the best way to go. Now, here are some important things to consider when reviewing your estimates. First of all, what equipment is being used? Are these from mainstream manufacturers or not? Secondly, what are the warranties? And we're talking about not only manufacturer warranties, but also the workmanship warranty from the installer themselves. And then lastly, what's the reputation of your installer? When you go online, you can quickly tell which installers actually own their work and which ones don't. Everybody makes mistakes, but the good ones always come back to fix it. When it comes to solar, everyone obsesses over which panel to buy. But here's the truth. Solar panels are a commodity these days. If you go with a reputable brand and get them installed correctly, you're going to be fine. So don't get hung up on finding the perfect solar panel. You essentially need to choose between budget, mid-range, and high-end panels. The bottom line is, regardless of which panels you chose, if you use a good installer, you should be able to hit your energy production targets over the next 25 years. There are really only two tangible differences between high-end panels and lower-end panels. First, we have efficiency. On the high end, you can achieve something like 24% on average, and on the lower end, you can achieve somewhere around 18 to 17%. However, depending on your energy production needs and the number of panels, it really shouldn't affect your overall production figures too much. Now, the second part is a little bit more important, but a little harder to gauge, and that would be degradation. All solar panels degrade over time. For example, on the higher end, your panels can degrade at a rate of roughly 0.25% per year, whereas on the lower end, you can have panels that will degrade at a rate of roughly 0.55% per year. So while that might sound like a really big difference, honestly, over the lifetime of the system, we're probably talking about a difference of roughly about $1,000 or less. So unless you're getting high-end panels to show off to the Smiths next door, going with a budget panel will do you just fine. Now let's move on to the second most important component of your solar system, the inverter. Think of it as the brain of your solar setup. It takes the electricity that you generate and converts it into the type of power that your home can use. Now, when it comes to solar inverters, you have two main options, either a microinverter system or a string inverter. Let's break down the pros and cons of each and you can decide what's right for your home. If budget is a concern and you've got a rooftop that has no obstructions and you're not concerned about shading, going with a string inverter is a great option. However, if you might have some minor shading or you want the ability to see individual panel performance, your next option would be to go with a microinverter system. Microinverters are devices that attach to each individual panel and gives readings and also adjusts the performance of each panel versus what you would find on a string inverter that addresses the entire array. These are great if you might have some shading concerns on your roof and it's important that your whole system is performing as well as it can despite maybe one or two panels being shaded by an obstruction. In addition, it also gives you the per panel production view so that you can understand if you have underperforming panels. The downside of a microinverter is, first of all, the cost. Typically, you can expect to pay roughly almost 40% more for your microinverter compared to a traditional string inverter system. Secondly, if something goes wrong, you have to get up on the roof and replace those individually versus being able to address that on the ground with a string inverter. No matter which inverter system you choose, one thing is critical. You need to go with a reputable brand that has a strong track record of both performance and support. A good inverter will give you many years of reliable service, and should something go wrong, replacements are easy to be had. But if you go with a cheap, no-name knockoff, you're basically just signing up for years of possible headaches and additional expenses down the line. The last thing I want to cover in this video is actually the biggest mistake we see folks make when buying solar. And that's assuming that just because you're getting a good brand, you're also going to get a good install. That's simply not true. I've seen top-tier equipment go completely to waste just because of the way it was installed. When choosing an installer here in Southern California, keep these two rules in mind. Read the one-star reviews. Everybody makes mistakes, but the good installers always come back to own it. Secondly, check multiple review sites. If one site is showing nothing but glowing reviews, but the other one is full of one-star reviews, that's a red flag. Look for consistent, good reviews across multiple platforms. Here at For Me Solar, this is something we know firsthand. Since we started as a service and repair company, we've seen every manner of bad install. From shortcuts being taken, to poor panel placement, to just entirely incomplete systems, we know what a bad install looks like. That's why we built our entire service around getting it done right the first time. If you're in Southern California and you're thinking about going solar, click the link down below to get a quote from our team. We'll work with you to design a system that actually works and stands the test of time. And we'll back it up with our full workmanship warranty. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more solar and home energy tips. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.